Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of our scary stories. I am your host, your navigator in the chilling depths of fear and the macabre. Tonight, we set sail on the tumultuous sea of horror, journeying to a realm where nightmares come alive and every shadow harbors a chilling secret. Prepare yourselves, for as the veil between our world and the terrifying unknown lifts, you'll find yourselves stranded on an uncharted island, alongside a mariner locked in a struggle for survival. There, among the ruins of an ancient civilization and the horrifying creatures that lurk, he will not only face the external horrors, but the darkness within himself. Fasten your seatbelts, steady your hearts, and brace yourself for the chilling winds of horror. In this episode, we bring you the tale of the lost mariner. Waves as colossal as mountains roared, and gales of wind shrieked, drowning Captain Jonathan Price in their furious symphony. The sea was a tumultuous beast, its fury whipping his ship into a fragile toy. Cold rain stung his weather-beaten face, and the taste of salt on his lips blended with the raw fear that clutched his heart. Secure the mizzenmast. Price hollered over the storm to his crew, but his orders were swept away by the wind, lost in the chaos. Their vessel, the brave mariner, was a seasoned ship, having tasted both calm and tempestuous waters, but tonight she writhed, battered by the relentless storm. Suddenly, with a bone-rattling crack, a monstrous wave collided with the ship. Price was thrown into the icy grasp of the sea. His vision blurred, and the cruel laughter of the storm echoed in his ears as he grappled with the swirling, monstrous depths. Just when he thought he'd breathe his last, an immense force hurled him into the unknown. Dawn arrived, not with the warmth of sunlight, but with the cold, bluish hue of a storm-washed morning. Price was tossed onto an unfamiliar shore, the sand gritty against his bruised skin, the taste of defeat and brine heavy in his mouth. His heart pounded like a drum, matching the throbbing pain that pulsed through his body. The ship, his brave mariner, was nowhere to be seen, just wreckage, pieces of his life strewn along the desolate beach. As he pushed himself up, his gaze fell upon a set of footprints, distorted, inhuman, marking the sand. The sight made his heart skip a beat. They were like no creature he knew, each print a grotesque combination of claw and hoof, sinking deeper into the sand than any man's. His breath hitched, a sense of dread wrapping around him like a shroud. But he was a mariner, hardened by the sea's trials, and he swallowed his fear, rising to his feet. Jonathan Price, captain of a ship that now lay splintered and scattered, looked upon the uncharted land that fate had thrown him onto. The unknown awaited him, its eerie silence cut only by the distant, rough whispering of the waves, a grim reminder of the storm that led him here. This was no ordinary island. That much was certain. As he began his first steps into the unexplored, the grotesque footprints a chilling guide, the first chapter of his survival began on this haunted isle. A muggy morning gave way to a blistering afternoon on the strange island. The sun bore down upon Captain Jonathan Price as he moved deeper inland, his boots sinking into the hot, powdery sand. The air was heavy with the scent of unknown blossoms, rich and cloying, punctuated by the tang of salt carried by the distant sea breeze. Overhead, exotic bird calls pierced the stillness, their shrill cries unfamiliar and disturbingly disjointed. Soon, the beach gave way to a dense jungle, thick with a muddle of twisted vines and peculiar trees that stretched towards the sky like spindly fingers. The underbrush teemed with life, a riot of color from strange flora, and the ceaseless hum of unseen insects filled Price's senses. He had to chop his way through, the rustle of leaves and snap of twigs under his boots a steady rhythm in the stifling silence. It was then that he heard it, a low growl, rumbling like distant thunder. Every instinct in him screamed danger. He stilled, his eyes scanning the dimly lit jungle. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the eerie hush. The growl echoed again, closer now, a raw, guttural sound that made his skin crawl. Then he saw it, a creature so grotesque, it looked torn from the pages of a nightmare. Half hidden by the dense undergrowth, its form was a horrific blend of man and beast, its body covered in rough, mottled skin that glistened in the dappled sunlight. Its eyes, yellow and gleaming, stared at Price with a malevolent intelligence that sent a shiver down his spine. Paralyzed with fear, Price could only watch as the creature emerged from the jungle shadows. It stood on two hoof-like feet, towering over him, a set of wickedly sharp claws flexing on its powerful forelimbs. A low snarl curled from its lipless mouth, resonating in the silent jungle, a terrifying promise of the horror to come. He broke into a run, heart pounding in his ears as he crashed through the underbrush, the creature's roars a fearsome echo behind him. The once vibrant jungle seemed ominous now, each rustle a potential threat, every shadow a possible predator. He found a hiding place within the hollow of a gargantuan tree, the strange bird cries above now sounding like shrill warnings of the terror that stalked him below. As the day slowly bled into a starless, moonlit night, Price stayed hidden, the horrifying encounter a grim reminder of his predicament. Stranded, alone, surrounded by nightmarish abominations, he found his survival instincts flaring to life. Fear was a luxury he could not afford. He was a captain, a mariner, and now a survivor. As he looked out onto the shadow-drenched jungle, his resolve hardened. His ordeal on this haunting isle was far from over. With the break of dawn, the island awoke, bathing in the golden glow of the rising sun. Jonathan Price emerged from the hollow tree, his body stiff and weary, his spirit ignited by a burning need to survive. The chilling encounter from the previous day was a specter that followed him into the bright daylight, a haunting memory that fueled his cautious steps. Moving deeper into the jungle, Price encountered a scene that took his breath away. Before him lay the ruins of what once must have been a grand civilization. Crumbling stone structures peeked out from the emerald embrace of the jungle. Weather-worn statues of unrecognizable deities stood with an air of melancholic grandeur. The ruins whispered tales of a forgotten era, a time when this now deserted island had thrummed with life. In the heart of the ruins, Price discovered an obelisk, tall and imposing, its surface adorned with archaic symbols and carvings. He traced the rough indentations, trying to decipher their meaning. They depicted horrific creatures akin to the one he had encountered, bowed to by figures that resembled men. The recurring symbol was that of an ominous deity, radiating a sense of power and dread that made Price's spine tingle. With growing horror, he understood that the island's inhabitants had once worshipped these grotesque creatures, or the god that had birthed them. What had led to their downfall? Had the monsters turned against their worshippers? The unknown history of the island sent chills down his spine, adding another layer of fear to his already grim situation. The heat of the day gave way to the cooler embrace of the evening as Price explored the ruins. The scent of ancient stone and forgotten tales hung heavy in the air, interrupted only by the intermittent rustling of the jungle and the distant crash of the sea waves. A sense of foreboding had settled over him, an unease that seemed to echo the doomed fate of the civilization that once flourished here. As darkness began to veil the island, Price found a secure spot among the ruins for the night. He could not shake off the unnerving silence that hung around the ancient structures, the oppressive weight of the island's cryptic past pressing upon him. Yet, despite the fear, an odd sense of respect for the island and its lost inhabitants flickered within him. Night fell, and with it came the echoing roars of the monstrous creatures. Price lay awake, staring into the starlit canopy of the jungle, the haunting echoes of the island ringing in his ears. If he were to survive, he realized, he needed to uncover the secrets etched into the very stones of this place, to understand the bond between the island, its lost people, and the nightmarish creatures. The story of his survival was irrevocably entwined with the echoes of the island's forgotten past. The advent of a new day heralded a renewed sense of purpose within Captain Jonathan Price. With the ruins serving as a grim backdrop, he set about doing what he did best: survive. He was a mariner, bred in the harsh embrace of the sea, and survival was the melody to which his life had always danced. He scouted the nearby area, eyes alert for signs of danger. The tall jungle trees provided some respite from the glaring sun, their broad leaves rustling in the soft morning breeze. As he tread the unknown paths, the earthy scent of the jungle filled his nostrils, laced with a touch of something bitter and strange that he soon recognized as a peculiar type of flora. Bright red, with serrated leaves and large, ominous thorns, they oozed a toxic sap that stained the ground around them. Intrigued, Price noted that the trail of grotesque footprints he had been following circumvented these plants, indicating that the creatures had an aversion to them. An idea sparked in his mind: if these plants repelled the creatures, they could serve as a protective barrier. Price spent the better part of the day constructing a crude shelter in the ruins and surrounding it with the thorny plants. His hands bled, stung by the toxic sap, but the sense of security they provided was well worth the pain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he lit a small fire. The flames flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the ancient stone structures. The crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of some unknown nocturnal creature were the only sounds that pierced the silence. Despite the danger that lurked in the shadows, Price felt a strange sense of peace settle within him. Throughout the night, he could hear the distant roars of the monstrous beings, their horrifying cries a chilling lullaby that underscored his grim reality. Yet, his protective barrier seemed to work. The creatures stayed away from his makeshift sanctuary. Dawn arrived, painting the ruins in a soft, golden hue. Price stood amidst the remnants of a forgotten civilization, looking at the protective boundary that kept the nightmares at bay. The mariner had become a defender, an islander who had borrowed lessons from the ancient land to fend off the shadows. The fight for survival had just begun, and in this strange, twisted version of nature, Jonathan Price was indeed proving to be the fittest. Daylight brought a renewed sense of determination in Captain Jonathan Price. Equipped with newfound knowledge of the island and a hint of bravado, he ventured deeper into the dense jungle. His surroundings buzzed with life, insects humming, strange avian creatures squawking overhead, and the constant, ever-present rustle of the mysterious flora. The unique symphony of the jungle was an accompaniment to his exploration, a reminder of the island's vibrant life and lurking dangers. In the heart of the island, hidden amongst a thicket of giant ferns and creepers, stood a monolith of black stone. It was enormous, a stark silhouette against the verdant green, its surface rough yet strangely reflective. As he drew closer, Price noticed the same archaic symbols carved onto its surface that he had seen in the ruins. They narrated a dark tale of a deity worshipped, of monstrous creatures, and of a pact that tingled his spine with fear. As he reached out and placed his hand on the monolith, a chilling sensation coursed through him. A sudden vision blurred his sight, a monstrous figure that towered over bowed worshippers, the same grotesque creatures wreaking havoc, and the monolith standing tall amidst the chaos. The vision was a window into the past, a stark reveal of the horrors that had once befallen the island's inhabitants. Price reeled back from the monolith, his heart pounding against his rib cage. His breath came in short gasps, the vision's haunting images seared into his mind. It was the deity, the god worshipped by the island's previous inhabitants, that had brought forth the terrifying creatures. The monolith stood as a beacon, a testament to their reverence, and possibly their downfall. As the sky began to darken, the monolith cast an ominous shadow over the surrounding foliage. It was a sentinel of the past, a bearer of the island's cursed history, and now a critical piece of the jigsaw that was Price's survival. The monolith and the terrifying deity it represented were tied to the creature's existence. And as the realization sank in, the enormity of his situation dawned on him. Back at his camp, Price watched the flickering flames of his fire dance against the night's canvas. The glow illuminated his hardened features, casting flickering shadows that matched the grim determination in his eyes. His survival was no longer a game of chance. It had become a challenge to decipher the island's twisted history. The monolith, that haunting vestige of the past, was an enigma he was resolved to unravel, for his survival hinged on the dark secrets it held within. The harrowing vision induced by the monolith was a lingering presence in Price's mind as night fully claimed the island. He lay in his makeshift shelter, eyes wide open to the stark blackness, the jungle's symphony a backdrop to his spiraling thoughts. Each roar from the grotesque creatures was a brutal reminder of his grim situation, a chilling echo that resonated with the island's haunting past. The images returned with a vengeance as he succumbed to a fitful slumber. He was a silent observer to the downfall of the island's ancient civilization. He saw the worshippers before the monolith, their chants rising to a crescendo. The monstrous deity emerged from the shadows, grotesque creatures following in its wake, descending upon the worshippers in a wave of terror. He woke in a cold sweat, the echoes of his nightmares still ringing in his ears. The dream, the memory of the island, was a relentless specter. He felt a surge of sympathy for the long-gone inhabitants of the island, their fate sealed by the very god they had revered. Price watched the sun rise, its rays piercing the morning fog that had descended upon the island. With each horrifying revelation, his resolve hardened. The monolith wasn't just a symbol of worship, it was a conduit, a link to the monstrous deity and its terrifying minions. His thoughts returned to the toxic plants. The creatures had avoided his shelter due to the barrier he'd created. Did the flora also affect the god they were linked to? As an idea took root in his mind, he looked towards the dense jungle, where the monolith stood in solemn silence. He had a plan. The rest of the day was spent fortifying his camp and gathering more of the toxic plants. His hands stung with the plant's corrosive sap, but he worked tirelessly. He was no longer just a stranded mariner. He was a man at war against an ancient curse, armed with his wits and the island's own weapons. As the evening fell, Price sat by the fire, its flickering light reflecting in his resolute eyes. The jungle hummed its nightly tune, an eerily serene prelude to the horrors that the night would undoubtedly bring. Price looked up at the moon, its pallid glow providing him the only comfort in the impending darkness. His nightmare had come alive, becoming an inseparable part of his existence. But it was a nightmare he was ready to confront, to learn from, and to fight. A haunting monolith stood as a testament to the island's cursed past, and, perhaps, as the key to his salvation. As night unfurled its dark canvas, Jonathan Price prepared himself for the battles that lay ahead. The echoes of the island were no longer haunting whispers of a bygone era. They were his guide to survival and escape. Armed with the hard-learned lessons of the island, Jonathan Price found himself standing before the monolith as the new day dawned. Its towering, black stone silhouette seemed more ominous under the early morning light, the etched symbols gleaming eerily. As he reached out to touch it, he felt an odd sense of anticipation. He was about to confront not only the god and the monsters it had birthed, but also his own deeply buried fears. With the contact of his hand against the cold, rough surface of the monolith, the familiar icy sensation surged through him. This time, however, instead of witnessing the island's horrific past, he found himself thrown into a whirlpool of his own hidden memories. He saw his life unfurl, the harsh upbringing, the relentless sea voyages, the countless storms weathered, and losses endured. He saw his mistakes, his regrets, every decision that had led him to this cursed island. The guilt and despair he'd kept at bay surfaced, tearing at his resolve. The abyss of his past gazed back at him, and he found himself drowning in it. Tearing his hand away from the monolith, Price fell to his knees, gasping for breath. His heart pounded against his chest, the haunting echoes of his past reverberating in his mind. He felt his eyes well up, a lump forming in his throat. The encounter with the monolith had revealed a monstrous entity he'd long avoided, the darkness within himself. Shaking, he rose to his feet. He realized that surviving this island wasn't just about facing the external horrors. It was a test of his internal fortitude. The creature-infested jungle, the haunted ruins, the terrifying monolith, all were physical manifestations of the fears he'd harbored within himself. And to survive, he had to face them all. Determined, Price set about his task. He began arranging the toxic plants around the monolith, their bright red color a stark contrast against the dark stone. As the sun traveled across the sky, he worked tirelessly, the sting of the toxic sap on his hands a tangible reminder of his resolve. As evening descended, he finished his task. The monolith now stood encircled by the poisonous flora, an imposing sight against the twilight's purple canvas. He stood back, his body exhausted but spirit undeterred, ready to face the horrors the night would bring. He had challenged the abyss within and emerged stronger, ready to confront the monstrous nightmares of the island. As the first roars of the creatures echoed in the distance, Price returned to his fortified camp. The night's impending terror did nothing to dampen his spirits. He was no longer the man he was when he'd first set foot on this haunted isle. He was a survivor, a fighter ready to battle the terrors of the island and the demons within his soul. A moon shone brilliantly in the night sky, casting a spectral glow over the ominous landscape. Jonathan Price could feel the energy in the air change as he approached the monolith. The encircling ring of toxic plants stood out starkly in the darkness, their lethal radiance casting dancing shadows over the age-worn surface of the towering stone. A deep roar reverberated through the dense jungle, sending a shiver down Price's spine. The creatures were on the move, their monstrous cries echoing in the still night air. He gripped the makeshift spear in his hand, his heart pounding with a heady mix of fear and resolve. His pulse raced as the first creature came into sight, its grotesque form silhouetted against the eerie backdrop of the monolith. The moment it crossed the boundary of the toxic plants, it recoiled with a bone-chilling shriek, the normally menacing beast cowering in fear. Emboldened by the sight, Price held his ground as more creatures appeared. They were all repelled by the poisonous barrier, their roars of frustration blending into a terrifying symphony that shook the very ground beneath him. But the sight of the creatures cowering was short-lived. A wave of chilling energy pulsed from the monolith, and a shadowy figure began to materialize. A deity of the island, the source of the nightmares, was revealing itself. Price could only watch in horrified fascination as the monstrous deity towered before him. It was a being of pure darkness, its form a swirling mass of shadows that chilled the very air around it. Its eyes, two orbs of fiery yellow, fixed onto Price, radiating a malevolence that threatened to consume him. With a roar that shook the jungle, the deity moved to attack. Price, driven by sheer survival instinct, lunged at it with his spear. The resulting collision sent him sprawling onto the hard ground, the breath knocked out of him. Bruised and gasping, Price rose to his feet, staring down the monstrous deity. His fear was a living thing clawing at his mind, but beneath it all, his resolve burned brighter. He was a mariner, a survivor, and he would not go down without a fight. With a primal yell, he charged at the deity, spear in hand, his every movement a testament to his indomitable spirit. The jungle bore witness to his heroic stand, a solitary figure battling the very essence of his nightmares under the uncaring glow of the moon. The assault on the monolith had begun, and Jonathan Price was ready to pay any price for his survival. The heart of the jungle had transformed into a battleground. Jonathan Price, battered and bruised, stood defiantly against the monstrous deity, his every breath echoing the will to survive. He could see the creatures at the periphery, held at bay by the toxic plants, their roars creating a chilling backdrop to his desperate struggle. He charged again, his spear aimed at the shadowy mass of the deity. But with a swift movement, it struck him aside. He crashed into the undergrowth, pain flaring across his body. Blood dripped from a wound on his forehead, blurring his vision. Yet, in the throbbing agony, he found clarity. His life on the sea, the numerous storms he'd weathered, the shipwrecks he'd survived, they all paled in comparison to this moment. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was battling his deepest fears, the darkness within him that the monolith had revealed. Drawing on his remaining strength, Price rose to his feet, his gaze fixed on the monolith. His weapon was gone, lost in the chaos, but he wasn't unarmed. He was a mariner, and he had the power of knowledge, the understanding of the island and its deadly flora. He sprinted towards the monolith, dodging the deity's attacks. Reaching the stone structure, he started pulling out the toxic plants from the ground, their corrosive sap searing his hands. Ignoring the pain, he hurled them at the deity. Each hit sent ripples through the shadowy figure, its form quivering, the roars growing weaker. The surrounding creatures echoed its distress, their cries growing frantic. The once fearful predators now watched helplessly as their creator writhed in agony. With a final heave, Price threw the last of the toxic plants. The deity let out a deafening roar that echoed through the island before it began to dissolve, its form fading like a nightmare at dawn. The creatures, too, retreated into the depths of the jungle, their roars a distant echo. Price, left standing in the sudden silence, swayed on his feet. His strength ebbed away, his body giving in to the pain. The monolith, devoid of its dark energy, stood silently, a mere relic of the past. As he collapsed onto the ground, Price looked at the tranquil sky above, the silver glow of the moon his only companion in the serene quietude. He had done it. He had faced his fears, fought the monsters within and without, and survived. He had triggered a rebirth through destruction, not just for himself, but for the entire island. Exhausted but victorious, Price let the peaceful silence of the island lull him into unconsciousness. He was a mariner no more, he was a warrior, a survivor, reborn through the ordeal that the haunted isle had thrown his way. Dawn painted the sky with strokes of vibrant pink and orange, a beautiful canvas marking the birth of a new day. Jonathan Price stirred from his unconscious state, his body protesting with every movement. He was a tapestry of pain and triumph, his wounds a stark testament to the battle he had waged against the island's nightmares. He stood on shaky legs, his gaze falling upon the silent monolith. Stripped of its terrifying aura, it was nothing more than an ancient stone structure, a relic from a forgotten era. A wave of relief washed over him, replacing the lingering taste of fear with a newfound sense of peace. He had survived the onslaught of the monstrosities, and, in doing so, freed the island of its centuries-old curse. His days took on a different rhythm as he started healing. The island, which once seemed a grotesque labyrinth of horrors, now welcomed him with open arms. The jungle sang a more pleasant tune, and even the creatures, though they kept their distance, seemed less monstrous in the new light of day. Price set about repairing a small boat he found amid the wreckage on the shore, the practical knowledge he'd garnered from his life at sea guiding his hands. The sound of waves lapping against the hull, the smell of salty sea air, the feeling of the rough wood under his hands, each reminded him of his past, and his spirit yearned for the open sea. The day came when his humble vessel, christened the New Dawn, was ready. Price stood on the beach, staring at the endless stretch of water before him. The waves beckoned, the horizon called out, and his heart drummed a familiar rhythm, the call of the sea. With a final glance at the island, he pushed the boat into the water. As he sailed away, the island, with its silent ruins and the haunting monolith, receded into the distance. He looked ahead, toward the vast expanse of the sea, its surface reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. The haunted isle was behind him, but its memories were etched into his soul. It had been a terrifying journey of survival and self-discovery, a voyage through the shadows of his own fear. But it had also been a testament to his resilience, his indomitable spirit as a mariner, and his rebirth as a survivor. The island had taught him that there were monsters in this world, some physical and others that resided within. But it had also shown him that one could face these horrors, battle them, and emerge victorious. As the new dawn cut through the water, marking the start of his journey back to civilization, Captain Jonathan Price carried with him not just the scars of his ordeal, but also the invaluable lessons he had learned, the strength of survival, the power of knowledge, and the courage to face one's own fears. Thus ends the tale of the lost mariner. We traveled alongside him, witnessed his courage, his survival against the monstrous nightmares, and his descent into the abyss of his own fears. As we bid farewell to the haunted island, we carry with us the stark reminder that monsters exist, both outside and within us. But so does the strength to face them, to survive, and to conquer. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this chilling journey. We hope you found this voyage into horror as thrilling as it was terrifying. Until our paths cross again in the terrifying depths of the Our Scary Stories podcast, remember, the echoes of fear resonate long after the story ends. Good night, dear listeners, and may your dreams be free of the nightmares we shared here with you. This is Our Scary Stories signing off for tonight.